my Kathmandu home. I've been based in Nepal and Kathmandu for about 7 years now, filming documentaries about Himalayan shamanism and about the festivals of Nepal and their ritual life, their ritual and symbolic world. I've ended up getting very, very deeply immersed in the culture, and today I wanted to show you some ritual shamanic knives and a few other things that sort of relate to that. So this is a traditional kukri knife made by the Mugger people, but instead of having a wooden or a horn or bone handle, it's got a metal handle, so it's quite unusual. You can see this is the actual handle is in the form of a human figure, so a seated shaman figure. So you've got the legs here and the arms up here and the head on the top. So the knife is very, very important in Nepali culture, as it is actually across the Far East in general. So for instance, in Indonesia, the kris dagger can stand in for the man if he can't be at an important meeting. It's even legal for a Balinese man's wife to get married to his kris dagger if he's for some reason called away from his own wedding. So the knife often stands for the man or stands for the person, and it's a symbol for the masculine principle, for that cutting, incisive, directed quality of male energy. Sometimes also there's a female side to it, so they often think of the blade as being the masculine and the handle as being the feminine. So you'll have two sides often to shamanic knives, where some of those elements are like a more feminine element is present. So, and it's all relative. So something like a deer horn would be seen traditionally as male, unless it's contrasted against something harder, which is metal. So in that case, this would be the more active principle, and that would be the receptive principle. So it's sort of the cutting and then the healing and sealing up. So the more subtle elements. So that's really interesting, and we've got a hole here where in a more traditional knife with the wooden handle, you can see that represents Shiva. So sometimes they call it like the Shivic eye. This interestingly is quite like makes a silhouette like a trident as well. I'll show you another one. This is a knife that I had made in Lumjung by a shaman. I've been trying to keep the shaman, the metalwork, alive. A lot of the metal workers are also shaman, and in some of the rural areas there's a real crisis of workforce, because there are about 4 or 5 million young people, young Nepali, working in the sort of Arab states, and so that means about 20% of the farmland isn't being farmed. Usually secondary farmland is the bit that's left, but you get these knock-on effects where the metal workers are often itinerant workers and often lower caste than the people owning the majority of the land, and so they're making they have status in terms of their skill and status in terms of being shaman, but in terms of economy, they're below the threshold of survival, because there's a little bit less demand for their tools, because not all the farmland's being made. So they'll make sickles and knives and other things. So I've been actively trying to commission even things I don't need, just to keep them in process until I find a sort of more permanent solution. So, and that's with a wooden scabbard. The idea was to have that made. It was very nice actually when you're commissioning, because the craftsman often, like, this was one of the best things he'd ever made, and so he was really, really pleased. But the process actually of commissioning is unbelievably difficult, because they'll often take an order. In this case, the man was too poor to buy the metal first, and he wouldn't tell me, and so I made the orders several times, and they kept not being made, and eventually I managed to figure it out that he didn't have the money to buy the metal first, and so I bought the metal in advance, and then when we commissioned other trishals and other things for shamanic rituals, we were able to provide him with the metal before we made the commission. So I've got a few different things here. So this is one of the most interesting and beautiful shaman knives I've ever had. It's got again a forged blade, very lovely shape, a wooden handle. This was probably a few hundred years old. It's got a deer skin scabbard with nice little decoration. It's got one element that's missing, and it has two very short straws made of wood. Now I have no idea what they're for. They're too small for normal drinking. I don't know why you would want that. Possibly for some sort of hallucinogenic snuff or something like that. I need to show it to some shaman and get their feedback and see if I can figure that out. It's very interesting and very nice that it's present. It's got a little bit of wear here on the back, and there was one other implement in the back, maybe another knife, a small knife that's now missing. So that's really, really interesting. Then this also is just wonderful. You see all the colour from the tikka still on the blade, rolled over, wrapped forged iron here on the hilt, holding the deer horn onto as the handle. Very nice in the hand. So the deer also is often seen as a sort of shamanic animal, as being particularly intuitive and insightful. The energy of the deer rutting grounds is often seen as a way of finding the ley lines in the land. So for instance, in England they found that when you douse, the standing stones have the same dowsing signature as the rutting grounds. So there's probably a relationship between these ancient peoples being aware of where the deer did their sort of mating rituals, and the special power points in the land, the ley lines going through the land. So the shaman often used deer horns in there as the handles, and you can see I've got a few others here. There's a similarity there between the shape of the blades, a little bit similar with this interesting curve. Very beautiful and aesthetic, and you can see very nice again in the hand. So the knives are used ritually in a way a little bit like the phurba. So the phurba are symbolic knives, and also for pinning down and cutting away negative energy, also for travelling, for journeying. So you project yourself into the phurba and travel through the different worlds. And sometimes the phurba actually have shaman figures on the top holding knives or phurbas. You can see this one has that metal tip for stabbing the negative energy, pinning it down. And the shaman knife is used in quite a similar way to pin down the negative energy, to cut away the negativity from the etheric body, but also for energizing. So I once had dysentery, dysentery, typhoid, and a type of life-threatening viral infection all at once up in the mountains. And one of the shaman that I knew, Sila, did a lot of mantra, and he poured water into like his own pot, and then he used his knife, very similar to this, in the water, stirring the water with the mantra, and miraculously it stopped my volcanic shits for about 24 hours before I was able to get down to Kathmandu. It took that sort of time to get back in out of the mountains and somewhere where I could get to a hospital. I still wasn't well. I've no idea how it had that effect on my body. I mean, it's sort of pretty strange and a bit miraculous, but he used the knife like that. I also was in a situation where there was one of the shaman I was working with, called Dowa, Dowa Sherpa, was up in the mountains, and he had been attacked by bakshi, or witches, and was incredibly sick. He's normally very robust. He's small and broad, stocky like me, but really, like the Sherpa, are often broad. And he was very, very ill, and a group of shaman came to try and save his life. And they did an amazing ritual for several hours. And I was in this quite small space, maybe a room about 15 foot square, something like that, with my full camera crew. So I had Ram and a French-Mexican girl called Susanna as another camera woman, and Saga, and a few support people, and I was also filming. And a number of the shaman went into trance, but one particularly went into trance, and he was going absolutely wild, like a wild animal, and out came his kukri, about the size of this, and he was cutting away, and it was frightening, because you don't know what's going on in their head. You have no idea how what they're thinking or imagining or envisioning, or whether they're seeing you as a possible problem. And my camera crew managed to get out of the room. So Susanna filmed through one window and Ram through another, and the long mics were poked through another window, and I remained there. I had my camera on a monopod, and I've done some martial arts, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know if I can use this camera and monopod to to defend myself with this wild, very, very wild shaman whipping around with this knife in this confined space, and lots of other shaman all drumming, everyone in trance, and the guy is cutting away all the negative energy from Dowa, and in the process of it, he slashes across his tongue 3 times, and it's really big, deep. I have this on film. Deep cuts and a mouthful of blood, and he's biting and sucking out the energy from Dowa, and lots of blood all dripping all over Dowa, laying there on the ground, very ill, and this guy sort of growling like a wild animal. Anyway, after the ritual lasted like 2 or 3 hours. Afterwards, his tongue was completely healed up. It was just black lines on the tongue, 3 black lines going across the tongue, no cuts. I have absolutely no explanation for this. I know what I saw with my own eyes. I saw the big gashes and loads of blood, and the tongue cut open. I've got it on film. So it's just, I've seen now so many very strange things while I've been here and deeply involved in this work. So that was very, very, very deep and very strange. So I'll show you a few other things here. So the Rai shaman, there's a lot of other bladed things that they use. So this is a Rai sickle, usually worn by the Rai people, but particularly the Rai shaman. They wear it on their belt, and you can see it's that shape. I'll do another video about the sickles. So this is used for cutting sacred herbs for healing, and also for cutting things like ginger. They cut the ginger like that while doing mantra, and the way the ginger falls and the way it's cut is a form of divination. So, and you have this spiral design, And then on the holder, you've got a sort of flower of life on both sides. It's particularly nicely carved, and then that slips in, and that's hung from the belt like that. Some other things here. So I have a Nepali friend who said this one's rather like a shank, but you've got a deer horn on the as a handle, a small forged knife, a blade, and all this wrappings are to do with offerings. It's like these are like a sort of promise. So quite often you have these, as when they do a ritual or a puja, there'll be some sort of wrapped around the wrist as a sort of promise that you need to leave this on for a month or for a few days or for a long time, for a year if it's just for the Brahmin when they do the ones across like this at Janapinema. So you see on the phurba you have a similar sort of thing happening here, and then when I was saying about the masculine and the feminine end, or the two different ends having different meanings, you can see here we've got a couple of knives. These four came together. I think they're probably Tamang, but I've yet to verify that. This one I think is peacock. My family used to have peacocks. I think that's a peacock foot. So you've got this, you can see it would have an active quality there where you might scrape things or touch things. This one is some form of bird of prey, and I have another one somewhere which isn't here, which was, you could see the talons a little bit better. So quite often on the costumes, the costume is like a sort of magical armour as well for the shaman, and they quite often have the like a headdress maybe of peacock feathers, and somewhere in the equipment, often stitched onto the dress, but maybe in a knife or somewhere else, they'll have something representing the head and something representing the foot. So this is a bit like yin yang. So it's literally from head to foot. So it's a symbol for completion. And so you've got these two knives, but both ends would be used. Both would have their own significance. Maybe for digging something away. Look, you can see the claws here have been completely worn out over time, where that end has been used. And again, maybe something would have been fastened into there, because there's an old hole from it. And again, so you've got that sort of delicate quality, and the wrapping again on the phurba. So the phurba's very much like a magic wand. One time a shaman said to me, without his phurba he had no thought of his own. So I thought that's interesting, and he carried his phurba in a little pouch which he kept by his heart. And so the shaman are very much identified with their phurba as a being, as a messenger, as a seeker. So you might send the phurba on a mission into the other worlds to go and get you information about maybe what's wrong with a particular patient, what the source of their illness is. So what else? Okay, this is a bit of a mishmash. The knife and this, I'm sure, is right. You've got this interesting use of with the blade and that fits onto the horn well. Quite an interesting blade. Interesting because you've got this odd shape, and maybe this is used for digging or something. So a lot of the shaman activities are both symbolic. So there's a symbolic layer to the meaning, and at the same time there's a practical inaction of something. So you might be digging something up, and at the same time that's physical digging, but it's also digging into something. So it's that you've got the symbolic level. So, but the scabbard here is wrong. This isn't right. This is probably Bhutanese or Tibetan, and silver plated. So that would have had a different scabbard. In the same way, sometimes when you find things, the scabbard's actually very beautiful and old, but damaged. This shaman knife came with it in a shaman box, but the two things weren't designed for each other. This obviously had a wider blade, probably more that sort of shape. You can see it's like this but bigger, isn't it? But I'll keep both. I may keep them together, although they don't really work together. So if I can find a better scabbard for that, I will, and if I can find a better knife for this, I will. But it's at the moment they're together because that's how I found them. So they also have a range of other things which act like knives in the sense of being directive. So things like arrowheads and spearheads, different types of deer horn. So this is a type of antelope horn that should be 2 or 3 times as long, and has been used as a phurba for defending against negative energy, actually, and protection. So this is often worn on the back, so also for protection against the dead, against the spirit world, and there are rituals connected to the dead with the Garuda. So you have an old Garuda bronze amulet here with a forged iron chain attached to the top. Very, very worn, very beautiful. There's another type of antelope also used as a phurba for stabbing down. So when I've been involved in things where I had negative energy, negative attacks, I sometimes place one of these at the foot of my bed. So it's like literally guarding, or even at the side if it's real trouble. So they're like phurba. There's a relationship between that sort of stabbing down, the directing the energy, and there's a few other things here which I'll show, which are very interesting. These were used shamanically, so they again have come from shamanic baskets and from shaman bringing them to me, but immensely old. And this is interesting because it's armour piercing. It's many hundreds of years old. The shaft has long since gone. That's squared off. I don't know whether it maybe even Mongolian or something, where they would have had heavier, or Tibetan where they'd have had much heavier armour than in Nepal. That square shaped forged is for punching through plate armour. It's not for hunting. This is a weapon, but again in the shamanic context, it's sometimes a representation for Shiva, for the lingam, or for the male energy. So you'll have quite often a spear like that. That's also armaments rather than a hunting spear. And again, hundreds of years old. That would be attached, and then you would have lots of fabric hanging down. That would often go into like a rice basket. And then where was the third one? This one. So some in medieval weaponry. I did a lot of Dungeons and Dragons as a teenager, and so my medieval weaponry and arms and armour is quite is ridiculously good. It would almost certainly have been. It came in the same basket, so they might have come together. Probably did come together. So that would be dug into the ground as a way, but also it becomes a double-ended armour piercing. But it's a way of holding a long spear, sticking it into the ground, and holding your ground against something like horse attack. But that was also in the shaman. in the shaman basket. So again, seen as having that sort of potent energy, potent activating power, because of the metal, because of the pointedness, because of the blade. And so that's sort of a wrapping up. On the table here I've got a couple of other Tibetan knives which I've also seen used by shaman. These ones I found in antique shops, but I've seen and I use this blade regularly in a meditation for presentness, imagining an enemy attacking maybe 100 times my power. So I'm bringing all my concentration into a single point, focusing all my awareness into the edge of the blade and the tip of the blade for one movement. So that isn't a meditation to do when you want to sleep, but it really wakes you up and brings you into the present. So I just showed that because of, actually I put them out because of the link to, you can see the Tibetan link, and I'll make a separate video about Tibetan knives. This is particularly beautiful with an ivory handle and silver and deer skin and two chopsticks for eating. So I've seen Tibetan knives amongst the Sherpa and amongst the Tamang. Originally those tribes would have come from Tibet. That's also a Tibetan dagger, a few hundred years old. You can see the nice groove here. In the big knife, you can see the silver work is extremely fine, and the handle as well, very, very fine, with a yak horn handle, and probably the original leather. But the blade is still old, it's still forged, but that blade should have had a groove here along there. So, and the blade is still nice, it's very nicely weighted, but it should be very slightly more weighted towards the tip end, so that the balance is just slightly more fluid in the hand, and also for carrying through with a cut, as opposed to so it's for cutting and slashing and stabbing. But when you've got a little bit more weight here, it carries the weight in. So a little bit like if you use a kukri like that for beheading a goat, say for a sacrifice, the flow through is very, very nice, so a little bit more weight on this end would make the flow through better. So you would expect that to have a groove, and you can see the repair here. The repair is ancient, so probably repaired 100 years ago, or maybe more than that. Unfortunately, that sort of halves the value of or even less than that, a third the value of the perfect knife, but still wonderful and very, very nice to do sort of meditative practice with. So yeah, you can probably tell I have a bit of a feel for knives as well as for phurba, and the phurba are probably my favourite of all the shamanic implements. They just have that incredible magical intensity to them. But you can see there's a sort of very active relationship between the knives and the phurba, and between their sort of active principle. So I hope that was useful and interesting. Do let me know if there are other things you'd like me to make videos about. I'm planning to make a whole series of videos about shamanic ritual objects and about other ritual objects and healing objects. So do let me know if there's anything you want to see, give feedback, and please share and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one. Thank you.